Alright, so we're gonna do this. Welcome to my channel if you're new, welcome back if you're a subscriber, and if you follow my content, thank you so much. Today we're gonna be talking about the Master of Masters theme from TH back cover. So if you didn't know, the theme that plays when Lucio is talking to the Master of Masters right at the end of that movie is the Master of Masters character theme. This is kinda different from other character themes in the series. First of all, we still don't have an officially ripped version of this track, because the entire back cover cutscene movie is pre-rendered. From what I've seen, no one has been able to separate the music and the voices and the sound effects. So everything we hear so far, it's been a bunch of noise in the background of the track and stuff. So I created a clean version of that. I arranged the whole thing and posted it on YouTube. It's the video I posted right before this one. If you guys want to check it out, feel free to look at my channel. It's going to be there. I might link it in the description as well. After I posted that video, people were asking me if I found anything in the track, if I found anything interesting. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As you can see here, I'm going to open the score. Here we go. So as you can see, I arranged parts for piano, organ, violin, viola, violoncello, contrabass, and more violins. The whole thing, instrumentation-wise, it's piano, strings, and then there's organ. I think I'm going to start talking about the instrumentation and what that can mean. First of all, we know piano and strings is the whole Shimomura thing, and she obviously composed this theme, as she can in front of herself. But the interesting thing here is the organ. Organ is a pretty interesting instrument when it comes to Kingdom Hearts. We first see a heavy usage of it in Chain of Memories, which is, I think it's the whole Castle Oblivion aesthetic thing, but also it was like one of the first instruments associated with the organization besides the piano. But since then, organ has been weirdly absent from the soundtrack until Birth by Sleep, where we heard Kingdom Hearts related tracks. And when I mean Kingdom Hearts related tracks, I mean related to Light and the Light of Kingdom Hearts, specifically the tracks the Key of Light, and the Key of Darkness. All themes are gonna play in scenes either relating directly to Kingdom Hearts appearing or just the idea of falling to darkness or something like that. But then, organ starts showing up in Kingdom Hearts as the main instrument of the foretellers. As soon as back cover came out, we got all of these new tracks, and pretty much every single new track in back cover has an organ in it, including the dearly beloved version in the title screen. It's very clear that organ has been used lately in Kingdom Hearts as a way to represent the Age of Fairy Tales, ancientness, and now the foretellers. So it makes sense that it's going to be here in the Master of Masters theme. He is from that time period, he is involved with these characters and this new saga. So that's very interesting. However, when talking about what is in this organ, like in the entire track, it is pretty much here just to fill space and to create a static. It is never the focus, it is there in the background. The organ itself, I don't think there is a lot to talk about. Just the fact that it's here, I think, is important for establishing who this character is and who he's connected to and what time period he is connected to. So let's talk about the track itself right now. In the very beginning of this track, it starts with, of course, this piano bass here that keeps doing this triplet pattern the whole time. Let's play just this isolated. So besides for a few moments in this track, this kind of rhythm is going to be present consistently in the piano. First thing we notice, but also we open up with this chord played by the strings and the organ. So I think the main sound we're gonna hear from these chords is the cello doing this. Also played by the violins, if I'm not mistaken. I wouldn't say this is definitely a reference to anything. I thought it was interesting to mention that this might be a reference to the study, specifically the choir that comes up. Again, this is pretty subjective, and this is my opinion about the track. I don't think this is like an actual reference, but I think it's important to talk about, right? So let's get into the real juicy stuff in this track, which is the main motifs introduced. So the Master of the Masters actually has two main motifs, and they're pretty much the only musical ideas that are expressed in this entire track. It's kind of funny to think that a track like this can like survive only having actually two motifs. The way these motifs are utilized and the variations in these motifs are utilized is pretty impressive. First main motif, which I consider the main motif of the entire track. So this is the first real melody we hear in the track. If I'm gonna be honest with you guys, the only part that I think constitutes as the actual motif itself is these first five notes. I say this because of the rhythm. We have a whole note, a dotted half note, a quarter note, another two whole notes, right? This is a pattern. This is a rhythmic pattern, and it constitutes the rhythmic motif of this motif. Uh, I'm sorry if I'm wording things a bit confusingly, but basically it's a rhythmic pattern that these notes follow. And right after this, we have the same pattern played again, but with different notes, right? This time they're going downwards instead of doing this M-like movement that we see here these notes do. So this is interesting because besides the crazy piano that comes like right after and in between these parts, this is the thing that is gonna play the most. These first five notes here is they're gonna show up in this track a lot of times. Specifically, they're gonna show up three times. Just to make it more clear, this is the first main motif, right? And these five notes that come right afterwards, they are the first variation on this main motif. Main motif. I'm gonna call it M. Right here we have the first variation, so I'm gonna call this M1. Then we get into this. So if you're a musician, you might realize that there has been a key change here. The track has modulated into another key. Doesn't really matter which key that is right now. But if you notice, it's the same sort of motif, but it has a variation. Right here, these first five notes, although they are different, they are the exact same intervals. It's pretty much the exact same thing as the main motif, but in another key. So let's call this again M. But this part that starts right here with this note, it is completely different from the first variation that we hear in the beginning. It actually starts in a higher note. There is these notes, there's a bigger interval between them and this one, right? Even being in a different key doesn't justify this. This is a completely different musical idea overall. So I'm gonna call this right here M2. This is the second variation on this track. So more stuff goes on. 12 measures of crazy piano madness that goes on here, which I'm going to talk about as well. But then we get into this. Very, very interesting. So what goes on here is basically taking the main motif, then it is playing the first variation, and then it is playing the second variation. This is M, M1, and then we have M2 here. There's a little pattern here, right? There's M, M1, M, M2, M, M1, M2. it spreads out these musical ideas from this motif and then brings them together as one singular theme. Pretty much the climax of the entire piece. There's a bit of symbolism that can be taken from this. This is all subjective as well, but I think it's an interesting concept to talk about. The idea that this motif spreads itself out in pieces, then is brought together by the end. I think that could have some sort of significance when thinking about the master as a whole. His disappearance and reappearance in the future might also be able to be read as falling apart and being brought back together again. Maybe something like that could be hinted at here, but I don't think that is truly what is going on. I think this is actually just form and musical form being used very differently compared to other pieces in the series before it. Something that I don't think any track in the Hearts series has ever done. Spread the motif, then bringing it all back together by the end of the track. One last thing I want to talk about this motif in specific is the melodic movement that happens here, right? This M-shaped melodic movement. This isn't really a reference to anything. But if you want to squint and to squint your eyes and pretend, you can kind of see the organization's motif here. I say kind of because this isn't a variation on it by any means, but it might have been inspired by it. Because if you see, it goes dun 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 dun, which is very similar to dun 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 dun. It's probably just a coincidence. I wouldn't be surprised if it is somehow supposed to be like kind of a callback to organization's motif. I wouldn't count on it, and I wouldn't say it is. So let's talk about the second motif in this track. So this one actually plays twice, and it's also kind of elaborated on after it plays once. So this is the first time it plays, and if you don't know what I'm talking about these notes played by the violin here. I also put them in the piano, but you're probably only gonna hear them in the violin unless you're paying a lot of attention. And then it repeats. The second time this plays, it is just the piano and the organ playing, but only the piano plays the motif. And this time it's also in a different key from when it plays before, but the musical idea is exactly the same. So what happens here is that this motif actually continues this time. It also has this kind of weird variation in it, where it plays a whole note instead of two half notes in this measure. It actually kind of reminds me of Aquasteen, which is probably a coincidence as well, because if you look at, like, if you really listen to a lot of Kingdom Hearts tracks, you'll find this exact musical idea that is also present in Aquasteen. You'll find it in a lot of tracks, and it's probably all accidental because they have no relation to Aqua in a narrative sense. But this is what I'm talking about right here. If you listen to Aquasteen, you will find that the very opening notes in the melody are going to be very similar to this. I don't think it means anything, but it's probably worth mentioning that it is here. But it also does this other thing where it plays the four first notes from the motif, right? But then it goes on to play this, which sounds pretty much the same, but it's actually kind of a variation in these first four notes. It's just continuing the idea of going down in these pretty regular intervals. So what's so cool about this motif, right? It is actually super weird that I found this because it is completely by coincidence. But here is a little thing I did. basically, this starts out with Dearly Beloved. This whole part here, it is not present in the Master of Masters theme, right? And from here and on forward, it's pretty much copy and pasted. It actually is exactly copy and pasted. So hear it for yourselves. Yeah, this is the very end of the iconic Dearly Beloved melody. I think no one has picked up on this yet because, first, it is not the first part that we would look for when looking for Dearly Beloved reference. Any other moments in the series that have used this motif as a reference, they use the beginning of it, these first notes, right? It's also not in the same key, but it's these notes. Any track that has a clear reference to Dearly Beloved is gonna use this idea, these notes, not this. So I think that that's the first reason that no one has noticed this. But the second reason is that it continues on to sound nothing like Dearly Beloved. It pretty much is a completely new thing by itself here, and it fools you into thinking that this is not a Dearly Beloved reference, even though it sounds very familiar. It doesn't start at where the melody would start, it doesn't end where the melody would end, and it also introduces new ideas, right? This is very different from any kind of usage of leitmotifs and references in general to other tracks that I've seen so far. And again, it could be very well, it could be coincidental. But it is worth talking about because these are the exact same intervals. They fit into the Dearly Beloved pretty well. At least these three measures here, right? Could be coincidental, could be intentional. It could be a result of Shimomura's compositional style and her other compositions just influencing accidentally her current compositions. I think it's cool. And it could mean something. So let's talk about the crazy piano, right? Everyone wants to talk about the crazy piano and the Master of Masters theme. And I'm really sorry guys, but you're gonna be disappointed to hear this. That piano is probably completely improvised. In an interview for the release of 2.8, she talks about how this track is the one that stands out the most to her in the soundtrack. She talks about how this is her favorite track in back cover and it's the one that stands out the most to her. And particularly what stands out is the crazy piano. Everyone wants to talk about the crazy piano on this track. But there isn't a motif hidden in there, at least not by Shimomura herself. Therefore, there's not going to be any super interesting musical material to look for there. But what's interesting is that it's improvised, and that's pretty cool because we haven't had improvisation in a Kingdom Hearts track before, at least not when it comes to the official soundtrack. It just sounds nuts. If you look at my transcription from the sheet music, it's available in my MuseScore for free. You can check it out if you want. But the piano part isn't accurate at all. I tried at first to make it sound pretty accurate. I tried to get the rhythm at least pretty similar, but it's really hard to transcribe an improvisation as crazy as that one. And to be fair, I don't think it actually matters what is being played. I think what matters is that it is being improvised by some funky dude. Not much to talk about in that regard. I think the one thing I can tell is that it's probably meant to show how crazy and insane the Master of Masters is supposed to be. I also want to talk about very briefly that it doesn't seem to reflect his outside personality. I mean, the song in general. It doesn't seem to be trying to represent the Master of Masters' personality when it comes to his playful and his teasing and just his more outgoing and happy-go-lucky side. But it is hinting at this more sinister side that we haven't seen much of yet. We see glimpses of it, or that's more serious for a second, But overall, if you look at the Master of Masters personality, he is very outgoing. And I think this is pretty cool because it shows us that for sure there is something wrong with this guy. At least in the inside, there's a lot of stuff that's probably hidden. He probably has a much more sinister side than we can think. So, actually, that's pretty much all I have to talk about this theme. It is all new material. There's only 2 new musical ideas introduced, and then it uses these variations on itself, which is super duper cool. We don't want to get spoiled by who this guy is just because there's a super obvious hint in the soundtrack. I think that would be bad. Storytelling, musical storytelling, we wouldn't really want that. It would be cool if future tracks used these 2 motifs that are introduced here, and slowly started hinting at connections. It's cool. I like this. It's very crazy sounding, and I hope we get more of it soon. I hope we get a clean version of it to hear in Melody of Memories or something like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. I want to talk about very briefly as well that I'm starting to do commissions for sheet music. So if you're starting to play an instrument, or you want to play some Kingdom Hearts music with your friends, but you can't find something that fits all your instruments together, you can contact me on Twitter. I'll post a link to my card describing how this process is going to work, what kind of arrangements I can make. I'm very excited to do that. I really hope someone commissions me if they're interested, right? So yeah, thanks for watching, and bye!